Sit back, relax, and let your imagination wander as I take you on a mystical journey through the wonders of ancient Egypt. Join Claire as she explores hidden temples, deciphers ancient hieroglyphs, and uncovers secrets long buried beneath the sands of time. It's a story filled with adventure, mystery, and magic, and you won't want to miss a moment of it. If you enjoy the journey, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss my next short story. It was a beautiful Sunday morning in Luxor, Egypt. Dr. Claire Norton, archaeologist PhD, drove her forerunner to the antiquities office. She unlocked the door and went to her office. There was some new LiDAR maps files that had just been downloaded onto her computer. She wanted to review them. These LiDAR maps have been a game changer for the detection of archaeological features that may be hidden by vegetation, tree cover, or even sand. She was scanning the third file when she noticed an anomaly which was definitely square, about 10 feet by 10 feet. She was sure it was man-made. Nature did not create 10 feet by 10 feet squares. She smiled to herself. She'd just go check it out. It was probably just a well or something like that, she thought to herself. It was Sunday. She didn't have anything else to do, and it wasn't far. In the back of her mind, she felt the pressure like every archaeologist to make a great new discovery to elevate her status in the archaeology community. She was 32 years old with no significant finds under her belt. She put the coordinates in her phone map app and headed out the door, slid into the driver's seat and took off towards the desert. When she arrived at the coordinates, she got out of the car, looked around, but didn't see any structures. She looked again at her phone to double-check the coordinates, and all was correct. She was in the right spot. Claire walked around looking at the ground and kicking at the sand, but couldn't detect anything under the sand. She went back to her car and retrieved her shovel, then started digging around in the sand. She was getting a little warm and somewhat frustrated. This thing measured 10 feet by 10 feet, it shouldn't be hard to find. She thought, shaking her head. Then she hit something hard. It felt like concrete or stone. She started digging, clearing the sand away. What started to appear was a smooth concrete slab, measured about 10 feet by 10 feet, which is what she saw on the LiDAR map. She dug most of the sand off, then went to get her broom from the car. As she was sweeping and clearing away the remaining sand, she saw what looked like about a 5 feet by 5 feet doorway cut into the center of the slab with small raised symbols that she did not recognize. She could read hieroglyphs, but these were completely different. The other thing she noticed was that this structure was not ancient. She bent down and rubbed her hand over the small symbols. To her shocked surprise, it starts to lift up. She gasped, stood up and ran to her car. As she stood by her car, the center slab began to open up, revealing a descending staircase. Claire, unnerved and frightened by what was happening, but also curious. Claire had always been curious about the world, and Egypt had consistently tugged at her heart, even as a child. She loved to read stories about the mystical land of ancient Egypt. Well, this tomb or whatever it was is open, and she had to take a closer look. She grabbed her flashlight from her car and picked up the shovel that was lying on the ground nearby, because you never knew what could be down there. She made her way cautiously to the opening. When she reached the steps, she shined the flashlight down the stairs, not seeing anything but the bottom of the stairs and a dirt floor. She made her way down the steps with the shovel in one hand, the flashlight in the other. When she reached the last step, and when her foot touched the floor, lights came on. She whirled around to see if anyone was there. She had her shovel at the ready. Her heart was pounding, and hearing the blood flow in her ears. She didn't see anyone. She looked up the stairs and didn't see anyone or anything. She could not tell where the light was coming from. She didn't see any light fixtures. What she did see was a square room about the size of a large living room. But what really caught her eyes were the magnificent paintings on the walls. She had seen them 1,000 times, in books and on ancient tomb walls. They were hieroglyphs, and the sacred painting that contains spells that help the dead navigate the afterlife. Claire was completely captivated. These hieroglyphs and paints looked like they had just been completed yesterday, the paint bright and luminous. She put her flashlight down on the floor and was running her hand over the wall, admiring the details, when she heard a sound behind her. She spun around to see a man standing by the stairs. She let out a small shriek, heart pounding in her chest, adrenaline flowing through her veins. She took the shovel in both hands and held it in front of her. "If you come near me, I will kill you," Claire spat out, sounding a lot braver than she felt, her whole body shaking. The man standing by the stairs didn't move. The sun was streaming down the stairs, highlighting him. He was about 6 feet tall, soft black curly hair that fell to his shoulders. His skin was a golden tan, his chest bare, wearing a linen kilt called a shenditz, which wrapped around his hips, and wearing sandals. He smiled and said in a gentle tone, "Claire, I would not, nor would I ever hurt you." Put his hand on his heart. "How do you know my name? Who are you? Did you follow me here?" She said in an angry voice. "My name is Rahil, and yes, in a way I did follow you here," he said in a soothing voice. "Why?" Claire asked with the shovel still at the ready. "I have come to give you a guided tour of Deir el-Medina," he responded. "I don't need a guided tour of Deir el-Medina. I have studied the ruins extensively," said Claire in an angry and dismissive tone. "I know you have. But it will be a tour like you have never seen," Rahil said. Claire started to notice something very strange about him. He seemed to have a slight golden aura that emanated from him. He was beautiful. "This is all too crazy," she thought to herself. "He must be a figment of my imagination. I'm very real. Here you can touch me," he said, sensing her thoughts. "No," she said, and backed closer to the wall. "Well," he said, "you can't go walking around Deir el-Medina dressed like that," he said with a smile. "If you touch me, I will use this shovel to defend myself," Claire said forcefully. "Besides," she thought, "I'm wearing my long pants, a lightweight plaid shirt, baseball cap to keep her blonde hair tied back, sunglasses and hiking boots, completely acceptable." "Not where we are going," he said playfully. A golden mist surrounded her, and when it cleared she was wearing a long linen tunic, tied at her waist, and sandals on her feet. She gasped. "What is happening?" she cried. "This must be a hell of a dream," she thought. "Come, I'll show you," Rahil said as he headed up the stairs. She followed cautiously. The sun was very bright. It took her a moment to realize what she was seeing. "Where is my forerunner? Did you have someone steal it?" Claire shouted, as she ran at him with her shovel. "No, no!" he smiled, holding up his hands. "This isn't funny," she yelled. Claire stopped in her tracks because behind him stood 2 magnificent Arabian horses, one dapple gray and the other a dark bay with a long black mane. Both were saddled and bridled. "I thought this would be a fun way to tour Deir el-Medina," he said. Claire dropped the shovel because she didn't want to frighten the horses. She walked up to the dabbled gray horse and placed her hands in front of the horse's nostrils to let the horse take in her scent. The horse nostrils flared and the mare nickered. She ran her hand down the horse's neck to its chest. "Hello, girl," she said in a soft voice. The horse dipped her head, and at that moment a calm and soothing feeling came over Claire. She was no longer frightened. Rahil walked up next to her and said, "Her name is Amina." "The stallion is named Orb," said Rahil. "They are beautiful," she said, looking at him, no longer being frightened of him, for reasons she didn't understand. "You're lucky I learned how to ride as a girl," she said, smiling. "Are you ready to go explore Deir el-Medina?" he asked. "Sure," she said as she mounted her horse. Rahil did the same, and they rode off toward Deir el-Medina. As Claire and Rahil crested a low ridge, the ancient town of Deir el-Medina came into view, nestled in the rugged desert landscape. The bright, relentless sun beat down on the dry, ochre earth, casting long shadows against the jagged cliffs of the Theban hills. Below them, the village stretched out in an orderly, compact sprawl, mud brick houses, squat and sun-baked, forming neat rows along narrow, winding streets. From a distance, the walls of the houses seemed to blend seamlessly with the desert, their pale, reddish-brown bricks worn smooth by the elements. The rooftops were flat and dusted with sand, while small wooden beams jutted out to support the structures. Many homes were 2 stories, with staircases leading to rooftops where women hung linen garments to dry in the heat. As the pair approached, the activity of the village became clearer. Men and women, dressed in simple linen tunics, moved through the streets. The men's tunics were wrapped around their waists, often tied with a simple belt, while their upper bodies were bare except for amulets or simple necklaces that glinted in the sunlight. Some wore wide-brimmed straw hats to shield themselves from the sun, and their skin was darkened from long days of labor. Women wore longer linen dresses, the lightweight fabric clinging to their forms as they balanced pots on their heads or carried baskets of bread. Their hair, braided or cut short, was occasionally adorned with simple beads or cloth bands. Children ran barefoot through the dusty streets, laughing and playing games with small carved toys, while older boys accompanied their fathers, eager to learn the skills of craftsmanship. The air smelled faintly of clay and stone dust, remnants of the day's labor, and the faint sounds of chisel on stone echoed faintly from the distant cliffs, where some craftsmen continued their work on the tombs. Along the edges of the village, small gardens dotted the landscape, tiny patches of green where vegetables and herbs grew, sustained by water carefully drawn from narrow irrigation channels. The houses themselves, though simple, were surprisingly well kept. Each home had small, narrow windows, often covered with woven mats or thin slats of wood to block the sun's heat. Some homes were decorated with painted symbols or charcoal sketches, crude but charming representations of animals, gods, or family members. Rahil pointed to one particularly large home, explaining it belonged to a foreman overseeing a group of artisans. As they rode closer, Claire could see a man sitting at the threshold of his home, carefully working a piece of wood into a small statue. His brow furrowed in concentration, the craft absorbing all his attention. Next to him, a weaver worked a loom in the shade of an awning, the soft clatter of the shuttle echoing faintly as she worked the fine threads. Around them, the rhythms of village life carried on as they had for centuries, steady, quiet, and purposeful, with every movement in service to the state and the gods. They stopped at what looked like a stable, where they dismounted. A young boy ran up to them and took the horses. "Water and feed them," Rahil said to the boy. The boy bowed. Rahil handed the boy a small craving of a special god. The boy smiled and went off to take care of the horses. As they walking through the village, Claire marveled at all the people and the workshops. She turned to Rahil, looking him in the eye, and said, "This is all wonderful, but you need to start explaining all of this. Why are we here and who are you?" "I will explain it all to you," he said, his voice low and heavy. "It's complicated. The things I've seen, the places I've been. I've been wandering for millennia, crossing the boundaries of time and worlds. It's not just this world or your world. It's many." She stared at him, confused. "What do you mean, many worlds?" He sighed, the weariness in his eyes deepening. "The world we see is only one layer of reality. Every choice we make, every event that unfolds, creates a new thread, a new branch in time. There are infinite versions of everything, versions of you, of me, of this world. I have traveled through them all, hoping to find a way out. But I always end up here." There was a strange light in his eyes as he continued. "I am bound to this time by a curse. It follows me wherever I go. No matter what path I take, I always return to the same moment, to the same events all those centuries ago." He paused, as if grappling with the weight of what he was about to say. "You think time moves in one direction, but it doesn't. It's malleable. I've walked across centuries, seen worlds you wouldn't believe. But I'm trapped, always pulled back to this place, this era. Every time I think I've found a way out, the curse resets everything, like some cruel joke. And I have to start all over again." Claire frowned, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "Why me? Why am I here?" she said. "Come, follow me. I'll start at the beginning," Rahil said. As they stepped into the dimly lit workshop, the temperature dropped, the cool air providing a stark contrast to the scorching heat outside. The faint light from oil lamps cast long shadows on the rough stone walls, flickering over the figures of artisans hunched over their work. The sound of chisels striking stone echoed softly through the space, each tap careful and deliberate. The artisans worked with simple but precise tools of bronze and copper. Mallets, smooth wooden handles attached to rounded stone or metal heads, struck the ends of chisels, which were carefully positioned to carve intricate hieroglyphics into the stone walls. The chisels themselves had different widths and shapes, depending on the detail required. Some were narrow and fine, meant for delicate lines, while others were broader for deeper, more prominent cuts. To create the finer details of the figures and symbols, the artisans used sharpened flint tools, perfect for tracing the delicate curves of feathers in a bird or the lines of a human face. Next to each artisan lay a small array of stone palettes and bowls, filled with powdered pigments, red ochre, yellow, blue, green, and black, waiting to be mixed with water or a binding agent like egg whites or resin to make paint. The hieroglyphics being carved were not just artistic flourishes, they were of immense spiritual importance. Each symbol was a key to the afterlife, a prayer, a name, a depiction of divine events, or instructions for the soul's safe journey beyond death. They were etched onto the walls of tombs to ensure that the deceased would be remembered, guided, and protected by the gods in the next world. The artisans understood this, their faces focused and reverent as they worked. Each line, each figure had to be perfect. A single mistake could be disastrous, leaving the soul lost in the underworld or forgotten by the gods. The paints themselves were as vital as the carvings. After the chiseling was done, another group of artisans, the painters, would apply vivid colors to bring the symbols and figures to life. The red ochre used for the skin of men symbolized life and power, while the yellow represented the eternal light of the gods. Blue and green were sacred colors, representing the fertile waters of the Nile and the renewal of life, used for depictions of vegetation and the sky. Black symbolized the fertile soil of the Nile, but also carried associations with the underworld and death. The Rahil stopped next to one of the walls, tracing the line of a hieroglyphic with his fingers. Each of these symbols, he said quietly, is a prayer, a key. This is how they ensured that the soul would make it to the field of reeds, their paradise. Every stroke has a purpose, every color a meaning. It's more than art. It's their way of preserving eternity. Claire watched as an artisan added a final touch to a depiction of the goddess Ma'at, her wings outstretched, her feather of truth poised above the head of a kneeling figure. The artisan's brush moved with confidence as he filled in the outline with deep, rich green, the color of rebirth and renewal. She began to understand the gravity of the work taking place in this vast workshop. It wasn't just the creation of beauty, it was the creation of immortality. The walls around her were filled with scenes and prayers, all carefully placed to ensure that the tomb's occupant would pass through the trials of the afterlife and join the gods in eternity. The artisans were, in a way, creating magic, a tangible connection between the world of the living and the mysteries of death. Each mark, every chisel stroke, was an act of devotion, a plea to the gods, and a safeguard against oblivion. I was an artisan, a foreman on a large project, Rahil said with sadness in his voice. As an archaeologist, Claire understood the process of how the foreman was in charge of the craftsmen that worked in highly organized teams or crews on large-scale construction and artistic projects. These teams were essential for the creation of monumental structures such as temples, tombs, and royal monuments. The organization was hierarchical, with each worker specializing in a particular skill, allowing for efficient and high-quality work. But she did not realize the real connection between the world we see and experience and the quantum worlds. Claire looked into his eyes and could feel his pain. "Let's walk down to the river. I know a shady place where I can tell you the story of what happened," he said. Claire and Rahil sat under the shade of tall, gently swaying palm trees. The warm desert sun casts a golden glow, but the shade beneath the palms offers a cool reprieve. Small lotus flowers dot the water's edge, and a few papyrus plants stand tall by the riverbank. In the distance, they spotted a felucca, a traditional Egyptian sailboat, gliding quietly across the river. Birds circle in the sky, and the occasional ibis can be seen wading in the shallow water, adding to the sense of tranquility. The air is fragrant with the scent of nearby lotus blossoms, and the soft rustle of the palms in the breeze completes the peaceful ambiance of this timeless moment. Rahil looked off into the distance, then he started to speak. I had earned my role as foreman after years of dedication. My expertise in drafting the complex religious scenes and inscriptions had been proven over time. The priests trusted me, and my workers respected my authority. But not all shared that respect. One man in the crew, Beck, had nurtured a deep resentment ever since I had been promoted. Beck was older, with many years of experience, and had expected to be chosen as foreman. His pride had been wounded when I, younger but more skilled, was selected for the role. Over time, Beck's jealousy festered, transforming from disappointment into a dangerous obsession. His jealousy became unbearable, and one evening, as the crew returned to the workers' village for the night, an idea took root in Beck's mind. He would sabotage the project, make it look like it was my mistake, and reclaim what he believed should have been his. The temple walls were nearly ready for the next phase, the carving of the hieroglyphs that my crew had carefully sketched out. The designs had been meticulously planned and measured. Every line, every symbol was imbued with meaning, meant to honor the gods and ensure Queen's eternal protection. Under the cover of darkness, when the rest of the crew had returned to their homes, Beck snuck back to the worksite. Using a chisel, Beck made subtle but deliberate changes to the grids and outlines that my crew had drawn earlier that day. He altered the proportions of key figures, making them appear clumsy and distorted. He scratched away parts of the carefully planned hieroglyphs, changing their meanings to gibberish. Beck ensured that the mistakes would not be immediately noticeable, at least not until the stone carvers had already begun their work. In the morning, Beck hoped, when the priests arrived to review the progress, the damage would be revealed, and I would be blamed. The next day, I arrived early to inspect the crew's progress. My heart swelled with pride as I looked over the massive expanse of stonework that my team had prepared. But as I walked along the temple wall, something strange caught my eye. A figure was out of place, a sacred ibis drawn too large, its proportions grotesque. I scanned the nearby grids and saw more errors, lines that should not be there, hieroglyphs marred with odd scratches. Impossible, I thought. My designs had been perfect. Before I could investigate further, the priests arrived, along with the higher-ranking officials overseeing the project. They immediately noticed the mistakes, and their faces darkened with displeasure. "What is this?" one of the priests demanded, pointing at the distorted figures. "This temple is a sacred place. Such errors are a grave offense to the gods and to Queen herself." "My lords, these mistakes, they are not my work. Someone has altered the designs," I explained. But before I could continue, Beck stepped forward, his voice loud and full of mock concern. "Forgive me, my lords, but as one of Rahil's crew, I must speak the truth. I noticed some irregularities yesterday, but I did not question Rahil's judgment. Perhaps he was tired or distracted." The priest said to me, "You, Rahil, are responsible for ensuring the sacred designs are accurate. This is your failure. You will answer for it." Rahil continued, "I was taken before the chief architects and priests for questioning. I pleaded my innocence, explaining that someone must have tampered with the designs." I explained. But without proof, my words were not believed. The punishment for such an error was severe. The sacred nature of the temple meant that any mistake was not just a failure in craftsmanship, but an affront to the gods. One of the highest priests conducted a sacred ceremony that put a curse on my soul. The priests and the chief architects ruled that I would be sentenced to forced labor. I was sent to the quarries. The conditions were grueling. Eventually, I was sold into slavery. I never saw my wife and son again. "I'm so sorry, Rahil. I wish I could do something to help you," said Claire softly. Rahil stood up and held out his hand. "I want to show you more." Claire looked up at him and took his hand. They visited a jewelry maker's shop. It was a small, dimly lit space, filled with the rich scent of metal and stone, where the warmth of the hearth used to melt gold and golden ankhs, delicate earrings, and scarab-shaped amulets lay carefully arranged on the workbench, glinting under the flickering oil lamps. Semi-precious stones, turquoise, carnelian, and lapis lazuli, were spread out in small clay bowls, their vibrant colors glowing in the soft light. Each piece of jewelry wasn't just a decoration, it was a tool of protection, a link to the divine. Amulets of gold and silver, meticulously shaped into sacred symbols designed to accompany the dead into the afterlife, ensuring their safety and eternal life. The artisan, a man with weathered hands, sat hunched over his workbench, his concentration absolute as he carefully carved hieroglyphs into a small golden scarab. His brow furrowed in focus, He barely noticed Rahil and Claire enter. The atmosphere felt sacred, as though the small shop was an extension of the temple's, quiet, reverent, and heavy with the weight of its purpose. As they watched, Claire's fingers brushed against the gleaming surface of a scarab amulet. The gold was warm to the touch. She picked it up, and in that instant, something strange happened. A shimmer, a faint glow, and then her vision changed. She gasped, her surroundings dissolving into something entirely different. The ancient workshop faded, replaced by the sterile white walls of a modern museum. Behind glass, the same golden scarab rested on a pedestal, its shine dulled by time, its purpose long forgotten. Tourists passed by, admiring its craftsmanship without understanding its sacred origin. It was just another artifact, a relic from a distant past that no longer held meaning for those who viewed it. But Claire saw more. In that moment, she understood. The work of the craftsman, though its religious significance had faded, had transcended time itself. His hands had shaped something eternal, a piece of art that had survived centuries and crossed the boundaries of time and culture. The jewelry wasn't just gold and stone. It was a bridge between worlds, linking the ancient past to the present and even the future. Claire looked at the Rahil, her eyes wide with understanding. He was a part of this cycle, much like the jewelry itself. His presence, his guidance, was a connection between worlds, past, present, and future, all flowing together like the Nile. The creations of the ancient craftsman, once imbued with sacred purpose, now lay in modern museums, but their energy, their significance, lived on. She understood now. The work of these artisans wasn't just functional or beautiful. It was a testament to eternity, much like the man standing beside her, bound to the timelessness of history. At once she was back, standing next to Rahil with the scarab amulet in her hand. She put the scarab amulet back on the table. "I need to sit down," Claire said with shaky voice. Rahil led her to a bench outside the shop under a tree. She looked at Rahil saying, "I understand my role now. I was a priestess, and would often help in performing ritual cleansing by washing statues of the gods, dressing them in new garments, and adorning them with jewelry as part of the belief that the gods resided within these sacred objects. I remember, I was doing my duty getting ready for a festival, when a woman ran up to me dropping to her knees begging for help. This was highly unusual. The other priestesses tried to shoo her away. Looking down at the woman, I felt a strange connection with her. She said her name was Amira, and 5 seasons ago her husband Rahil, who was a crew foreman working on a temple when he was accused of dishonoring the gods by making a mistake on a temple carvings. He was sent to the quarries by the high priest as punishment. She then told me that she could now prove that he was innocent. I asked her how she would be able to prove such a thing after all this time. Amira said that a few weeks ago, Beck was drinking with his crewmates, and he bragged that he sabotaged the guidelines for the paintings and carvings that you were responsible for. Amira said one of the crewmen was the husband of her best friend, and her friend told her this. She said that the crewman who heard Rex say this will swear to what they heard. Claire took a breath and continued, I told Amira that I would try to help, if I could. She thanked me and turned to walk back to her home. I went to consult with the high priestess. She said that she would request an audience with the high priest who had passed judgment and placed the curse on you. A few weeks later, I was summoned by the high priestess. She told me that she had spoken to the high priest of Amun, and he told her that he had communicated with the gods in this matter, and the gods' judgment was that the punishment and curse that was served out to Rahil was right and just, and it would not be changed. I sent my servant to relay the message to Amira of the decision, Claire said with tears in her eyes. Rahil smiled at Claire, saying, That's why I have been looking for you through all these thousands of years. Claire looked at him strangely, saying, What do you mean? Claire, the priest in ancient Egypt had access to the papyrus scrolls that provides the ritual for the sacred purification and banishment of the dark curse. He said, But first we need the scarab amulet that you touched at the artisan's shop, Rahil said. We can't buy it, can we? She said with a little optimism in her voice. We can trade, though. He said. They returned to the shop. Rahil approached the artisan and asked him if he would make a trade for the scarab amulet. No, the man said, shaking his head. It's too valuable and sacred. Rahil removed a small piece of papyrus from his linen kilt and handed it the man. All Claire could see of the papyrus was that it was about 2 inches by 3 inches, with Egyptian writing and some kind of seal embossed on it. The old man looked at the papyrus and then looked up at Rahil. The man nodded and handed the scarab amulet to Rahil as they walked out of the shop. "Well, that was easy," Claire said with a smile. "What was on that papyrus?" she asked. "It was a receipt for a year's worth of bread and beer," Rahil replied. "He can make another scarab," he said, smiling. "Now, what do we do with the scarab amulet?" she asked. Rahil said, "Claire, at the museum you have access to the ancient papyrus scrolls from the Temple of Deir el-Medina." Claire said, "Yes, I do, but can we find what you are looking for?" Rahil said, "Let's get the horses and ride back to the portal." Claire asked, "Is that what that room is?" All Rahil said was, "Yes." As they rode back, the sun was getting low in the sky. Claire judged that it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She was a little hungry. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. "I wonder if Rahil eats," she puzzled, him being a spirit, ghost or person from many world or whatever he is. They arrived at the portal and dismounted the horses. Claire patted her horse's neck and said, "Thank you, Amina. You are wonderful." The horse dipped her head and nickered. They descended the steps into the portal. "We can't go running around Deir el-Medina dressed like this," Rahil said. Claire said with a twinkle in her eye, "Well, I think you look pretty damn good in that kilt." "You don't look half bad yourself," he replied. "I think that was a compliment?" she said with a smile, and he laughed. Rahil raised his hands, and a golden mist surrounded them. When it cleared, Claire was dressed in her previous clothes, and Rahil was dressed in shorts, t-shirt, and tennis shoes. Claire said, "You sure have some interesting talents." He replied, "Yes, I have many skills." Claire thought, "I'll bet." They walked back up the stairs, and before her was her forerunner. She laughed and shook her head. "What?" Rahil said, a sheepish grin on his face. Claire slid into the driver's seat and Rahil in the passenger side. Claire asked, "Do you eat?" "Yes, I do in fact eat. Do you?" he said, teasing her. "Let's go find a place to eat. I'm starving," she said. They drove towards the town and found a small restaurant. Claire ordered shawarma and Rahil had hawashi. As they were eating, Claire asked Rahil what happened to him after he was sold as a slave. "I was sold to a Syrian to help pay off my master's debts. I was taken back to Syria and worked on a farm. I died several years later after a plague moved through the region," Rahil said. "I'm very sorry that I was not able to help you, your wife and son. Do you know what became of them?" Claire asked. "No. We're all on our own journey," he said. "Now that I think about it," Claire said angrily. "That priest would not rescind the curse because it would have lowered his status and prestige in the priesthood." "You are correct, Claire," he said. "The immortals recognized that the punishment and curse was unjustified, and I was granted the power to reconcile and banish the curse. It took me many thousands of years to find your soul in the correct time and place," Rahil explained. They finished their meal and drove to the museum. Claire unlocked the door, then headed to her office. She turned on her computer and looked for the folder that contained the digitized papyrus collections. She clicked on the folder named Ritual Text. There were hundreds of digitized pages. "How are we going to find what we need? This will take forever," Claire said. "Let's try a couple of word searches." Rahil said, "Okay, let's try purification," she said, typing in the word. Several pages came up, but not the one they were looking for. Next, she tried dark curse. Some of the pages were translated, but not all. As they were scanning the documents, Rahil spotted the word curse. "Wait, Claire, let's take a closer look at this," he said. She stopped scrolling and enlarged the text on the screen. Some of the text was missing, but what was there they could make out the writing in hieratic, Egypt written language. Purification, banishment, curse. Below this, in smaller written hieratic, were written instructions. Rahil read the instructions out loud. The high priest must have a bowl containing salt from the Mediterranean, the symbol of purification. He sprinkles the salt into the flames of the temple's brazier, speaking the prayer. As the waters of the Nile cleanse the earth, as the salt purifies the sea, so too shall this curse be lifted. Next, the high priest provides lotus petals, the sacred flower of rebirth, symbolizing renewal and purity. He casts them upon the fire, continuing the prayer. By the power of the lotus, symbol of rebirth, let this soul be born anew, free from the shadow that binds them. As the high priest chants, he moved a sacred sistrum, a ritual rattle, in circular motions around the afflicted, shaking it to drive away the dark forces clinging to the body. I command thee, foul spirit, be gone. By the light of a moon, you are undone. Let the scales be balanced, let this curse be no more. The high priest takes a golden scarab amulet from the altar, blessed by the gods, and held it aloft. He places it on the afflicted's chest, speaking directly to the dark force that had taken hold. By the sacred scarab who rolls the sun across the sky, I bind you, spirit of shadow. You shall no longer torment this soul. The high priest returned the sacred tools to the altar. He had done his duty, invoking the ancient powers to restore balance, as had been done for thousands of years in the land of Egypt. After reading the text, they both looked at one another and both said at the same time, "This must be it," and hugged. Claire asked, "Now, what do we do?" Rahil said, "Print out the text and we'll take it with us. We have the amulet. What the instructions say, we will need salt from the Mediterranean and lotus petals. Let's go to the markets and shops to see what we can find. Then we'll return to the portal." They left the office and drove to the markets and shops in Luxor. After a short time they found what they needed, then drove out of town toward the portal. "How do you know this will work?" Claire asked. "I don't, but it's the closest I've ever been. We will know when we get there," Rahil said. When they drove up to the portal, there was a light emanating from the stairs. As they made their way down the stairs, they could feel a presence. When entering the room, they saw a temple brazier, an altar, a man and woman dressed in temple garb. "It's been a long time, Rahil," the man said, shaking Rahil's hand. "Yes, it has," replied Rahil, smiling. "Welcome, Claire. I want to thank you for helping Rahil with this quest," said the woman with a lovely smile. "You're welcome," Claire said, really not knowing what else to say to an immortal person, ghost or spirit or whatever they are. "Are you ready, Rahil?" the man said. "Yes," Rahil said reverently, and knelt before the man. Claire handed the man the items that they had brought with them. "Thank you," the man said. Claire bowed her head in acknowledgement. The priest started the ritual, not needing the printout that they have brought. The priest performed the ritual, and the words of the prayers perfectly and magically. Claire could feel a special aura around them. The feelings of peace and contentment she experienced when she entered a great temple or cathedral. When the ceremony was completed, Rahil stood and kisses the man on each cheek and did the same to the woman. The priest said to Rahil, "You have the right to choose the world or time you would like to experience." Rahil turned to look at Claire and said, "This world and time will do me just fine." Claire smiled and blushed. "So it shall be. Peace be with you both," the man said to them. Rahil held out his hand to Claire, and she gladly took it into hers. They both bowed to the man and woman, then walked up the stairs. As they walked toward the forerunner, Claire looked up into the night sky, and seeing the stars and moon, felt very small and incredibly awed by it all. She turned to look back, and the portal was gone. Claire said, "I didn't get their names." Rahil said, "That's okay, they know yours." "This was an interesting way to get a new boyfriend," she said with a big smile. "Oh, is that what I am?" he said, and then gently brought her close and kissed her. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Your support means the world to me, and it helps the channel grow. Stay tuned for more great content, and I'll see you in the next one.